After 2 years of intensive preparation, we have placed before the governments of the world a program of action that is really without precedent.
In the next 25 years, the Earth's population will increase more than it has in the last million years. And to the nations of the world, this poses a greater threat than anything we have experienced before. People on every continent, all facing disaster if we don't find a solution for the population explosion that now threatens the world. Because man, like all creatures, needs and depends upon the oxygen, the water, the food that is provided by the self-balancing tendency of nature. And this is being threatened by the technology that makes civilization possible. By our interfering with natural processes, we are destroying the natural environment upon which we all depend. If we do not now take action, drastic action, and develop the wisdom to maintain an environment which is basic to all life, the only answer can be disaster.
President Nixon and the United States Congress established the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future. The chairman of this unique commission is John D. Rockefeller III.
It was a very broad-ranging mandate. Nobody's had one of this character before. And just from that, this question of quality of life just emerged as the seemingly key issue.
But the main finding was that stabilization of some kind is clearly desirable for the country.
Yes, we said that it is recognized that population cannot continue to grow indefinitely. Nobody questions that. And we said from our findings, we felt that now the nation should welcome and plan for a stabilized population. Well, the whole question of pollution, environment, and population came very much to the fore in amazingly rapid time. And President Nixon, in July 1969, made a statement to the Congress exclusively on this question. And I'd like to read just 2 sentences from that statement, as I think it's indicative of his concern in regard to the subject and his recognition of its importance here and around the world. He said, "One of the most serious challenges to human destiny in the last third of this century will be the growth of the population. Whether man's response to this challenge will be a cause for pride or for despair in the year 2000 will depend very much on what we do today."
This commission, at the urgent request of President Nixon, and after 2 years of studying the problem, recommended that laws prohibiting abortion be liberalized, that government funds be made available to cover abortion services, and that abortion be covered in health insurance. Families are encouraged to have 2 children, and it is suggested that sex education be widely available. The Population Commission also urges that individual states encourage teenagers to receive contraceptive services and hospitals relax policies concerning voluntary sterility and make it easier to obtain. The Population Commission never advocated abortion as a means to control population. The Commission's report has now been rejected.
I do think, to begin with, governments often appoint commissions so they won't have to deal with the problem.
No city is a greater example of the depersonalization of the human being than New York City. New York City has become practically ungovernable with almost weekly breakdowns and strikes, disrupting all services to the city. This once shiny golden door to a vital nation has become a cesspool of crime, overburdening welfare and racial strife. New York is a product of a population out of control, unhealthy, and unstable.
And I think we have to talk first about balance. That we want to balance the population, the people that are here at any one time, with the resources at any one time. And we know at the moment we don't have the resources. We don't have the teachers to teach them. We don't have the doctors to care for them. We don't have enough older people to care for them because the older people are still dying. The children we've been saving. And in countries like the United States and Northern Europe, each child at present is responsible for using so much energy and producing so much pollution that this is a danger too.
A prominent geoastronomer, Dr. Walter Orr Roberts, is president of the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research and the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
Well, I think we need to, first of all, recognize that there is probably somewhere a limit to the population, but that we don't know what that limit is. And I do think that in parallel with the study of what the true limits are to population growth, that are ultimate limits for mankind, we should put a great deal of effort onto just what you have said. The better life with less waste, better life with less energy, better life with less transportation, better life for the human being, almost certainly urban, but with opportunities to get out into nature more easily than now. Just the better life. And it can be done.
There are places where the concentration of population is so dense, is so terrible, that no one has a decent life now, even if they aren't industrialized, and if they are industrialized, it makes it 1,000 times worse.
Dr. Harrison Brown is professor of geochemistry and of science and government at the California Institute of Technology. He is foreign secretary of the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C.
There are several population problems. And the most obvious one, of course, is that there are still very many people, and that the numbers of people are growing so rapidly. But superimposed upon that, there would be population problems in these countries, even were the population itself not growing. This results from the fact that people are moving so very rapidly from the land into the cities.
We have a population that, because of the way it's distributed, and because of the strain on the use of power and the use of pesticides and insecticides and all of these things, a population that is endangering life in this whole planet, and one is part of the other. Furthermore, the enormous population increase, an increase that we're powerless to stem immediately, because we're undoubtedly going on to something like 7 billion people. Obviously, this is no moment to increase population. In fact, it's a moment to postpone the increase. And I think if we can think about the unborn children who will be our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, we have an obligation to them that they should not be born in a moment when their chances of the good life are so poor. We should postpone their birth until we've got this problem in hand, until we are making this planet safer for people. And we have to recognize also that the industrialized countries must balance their population as vigorously or more vigorously than they ask any other part of the world to do, because we may not be as poor. We may be able to feed our populations on beautifully packaged food that's been very carefully set up and is using tremendous amounts of polluting materials to bring that food into our homes. This population increase is endangering the quality of life everywhere.
Dr. René Dubos, the eminent microbiologist, is recognized as one of the world's foremost scientific humanists. and a Pulitzer Prize winner.
At the present time, the population in this country and in Europe is increasing at the rate of about 1% a year, whereas the consumption of electric power and the consumption of resources is increasing at the rate of 6% a year. So that even if we were to stop population growth, we are not going to solve our problems unless we do something about the technological enterprise. So first, let me make clear that control of the technological enterprise is just as important as control of population. But after saying this much, I also believe that unless we control population, we won't solve our problem.
So in this generation, now, we should invite fewer people to be born.
The quality of life, especially for the elderly, has reached the lowest point in modern times. With ever higher and higher living and medical costs, the once bright promise of a golden age in life has become instead a time of despair, hopelessness, and resignation.
Man is immensely adaptable. After all, there has never been a more polluted environment than the industrial areas of Northern Europe a century ago at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There is nothing in our time which is as polluted as this was. And men have survived. Men survived in the most terrible situations with very little food. So the question is not destruction. The question is whether it is worth surviving under these conditions.
What we're worrying about is what's going to happen to the atmosphere all around our Earth, and it's going to hit you wherever you are, in Africa and Asia and South America, just as much as it will hit the principal polluters in the world.
The developing nations don't have to have the dreadful cities that we've got in the developed world. They do not have to have megalopolises of 6 to 10 to 20 million people. If you begin now with a sensible concept of an urban grid, with poles of growth in various parts of the developing countries, you can have cities of 500,000 to 1 million as your centers of population. You can have the smaller cities serving the new agricultural markets, and you can, as it were, disperse your population so that you don't have, well, you know what we call Boston to Washington.
Yes.
Boswash, isn't it?
Boswash.
I mean, you know, you can avoid this because the developing nations are not dug into stone and concrete and iron and steel the way we are.
Now, I don't think we should talk about countries as growing. Countries aren't single organisms. And if we talk about their growing, we are saying, in effect, that if they finally reach maturity, the next thing they will do is to be senescent, senile, and dead.
At the present time, there are 130 some odd nations, each of which likes to consider itself as sovereign, each of which likes to think that it can do anything it pleases. We now know that we are locked together in many ways. We inhabit this single planet together, and with the high levels of technology, we are beginning to interfere with each other.
I mean, it's inconceivable for any Western democracy to subsist even for 10 years more if we didn't have, through progressive taxation, a steady transfer of resources from rich people to poor. Well, I consider that we can begin to talk about the world environment and about safeguarding our planet when we, the rich nations, are giving in perfectly formal, institutionalized tax assistance. Oh, at least 1% of our gross national product in development capital for the poorer nations. I would go higher myself. We've got to stop lecturing them while we sit back and engross 80% of the world's income for 20% of the world's people. And that, I think, is the critical thing on this development environment issue.
Modern technology has been called man's salvation, and at the same time, man's downfall. It is only in the controlled use of technology that man can hope to survive.
Those countries which have produced wealth because of strong material drives and the command of science and technology and its use for increasing of production and consumption are simply going to have to reorient some of their own growth patterns around the provision of more non-material needs And they're going to have to understand that those parts of the world that do not enjoy the same material benefits that we do are going to have to concentrate for a good many years on the provision of the more material needs of life. And so that these two things, I believe, are complementary. And they give us a completely new set of reasons for taking a look at the total needs of the people of this world and the total resources which we have, and developing a much more cooperative attitude towards the care of and the use of the world's resources.
Among the new technologies being developed for agriculture is a remarkable technique for stabilizing the earth with oil to retain moisture and to stop erosion. This oil-based mantle has dramatically changed arid desert wasteland, empty since the time of man, into productive fields of life-giving harvest. Agricultural research such as this is being carried on in laboratories throughout the world in an effort to turn the tide in man's search for additional food sources. The very base of man's existence, the soil, has been abused by untold civilizations. The soil has long been laid bare by careless builders and ignorant farmers.
I feel that one of the most important incentives that we can have is to increase the price of energy. Energy is ridiculously inexpensive when it comes right down to it. And as a result, we waste it. We throw it away. We leave electric lights on. We take unnecessary trips and so forth. We are able to do that because we don't have to worry so much about the cost of energy. If the cost of energy were doubled, people would think about it more.
The central lesson of the environment issue for this generation is the necessity of our recognizing that we have reached a seminal point in human history, a point at which man's own interventions in the natural environment are really now the principal determinants of his own future.
When we reach the ultimate of power, which we have done, we can only respond by having the ultimate of community, which is a single planet. And that is where self-interest, moral interest, and sheer technical fact coincide.
Many politicians are frightened to face their constituents with this kind of a truth. They have a fear that if they support the idea of a more equitable distribution of the world's resources and so forth, that they would not be voted back into office. What do you say to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, that if you take some of the Western democracies, Canada, my own country, Britain, Holland, all the Scandinavian countries, France up to a point, all these countries have now formally agreed that by 1975 they will give 1% of gross national product in aid to development. And one reason why they're doing that is because their electorate would no longer accept the idea that you shouldn't do it.
Dr. Brown, if you could address the delegates at the Stockholm Conference, what would you say?
I believe I would say that we are to solve these very crucial problems which are confronting mankind collectively. A higher level of cooperation, a higher level of morality, a higher level of discipline will be necessary for all mankind. And I would hope that the delegates from this conference would emerge with a sufficient understanding of these problems and their seriousness to express a willingness to delegate a part of the sovereignty which they believe their nations have over these problems to an international organization, to the United Nations.
Unless the people of the world understand that what Stockholm is asking of them is really nothing less than a new sense of direction for the whole human race, then it's not realistic to expect that the governments of the world will take the kind of decisions that will make that possible.
What do you think of as the major good that could come out of the Stockholm Conference?
Well, the fact that it's held at all, the fact that it is now a world conference, that people are coming from every country, that every government is alerted to the fact of an environmental crisis.
So on the one hand, I'm enormously optimistic because I feel that there's a whole generation growing up that is tired of the more blatant forms of materialism but is bewildered by the lack of institutional innovation and invention. And it's all very well to say, well, go ahead and innovate yourselves. But you need experience and you need an actual sense of how things are organized to be able to do this kind of creative innovation.
The change is happening now. And by this I mean that a very large percentage of the public, and especially the enlightened components of the establishment, have become aware of the urgency of the environmental problem.
The human is not a simple animal. We have harnessed the power of the atom. We have reached the moon. And yet we do not seem to understand our place on Earth and the natural laws that govern us. It is in the understanding of these laws and action in concord with them that our salvation lies. The salvation of the Earth and our own salvation. There is still time.
Hopeful signs are beginning to appear on the international horizon. The recent agreement signed between the United States and the Soviet Union on mutual environmental problems is a large step forward. Only through international cooperation can we hope to correct the crisis facing all mankind.
Man inhabits two worlds, the natural one that preceded us by billions of years, and the world we have built from our technology, using our machines and science to create an environment obedient to our purpose and directions. And now, as we enter the last stages of the 20th century, there is a spreading sense of awareness that something fundamental and irrevocable is happening to man's relations between both his worlds. Our new knowledge of planetary interdependence demands a reshaping of our individual loyalties. We must develop a sense of planetary community and commitment. We must make our Earth a center of rational loyalty for all mankind. Nationalistic loyalties must become secondary to our allegiance to Earth. We can only hope to survive in all our prized diversity by achieving an ultimate loyalty and devotion to our single, beautiful, vulnerable planet, the Earth. Alone in its life-supporting systems, powered by inconceivable energies mediated for us through the most delicate adjustments. Is this not a precious home for all us Earthlings? Is it not worthy of our love? Does it not deserve all the courage and care of which we are capable to preserve it from degradation and destruction? Now, for the first time in the history of man, an international movement is underway. The people of the nations and the nations of the world have joined together to find the answers. This building and the world's representatives hold the solution. We have seen what we've done to bring about the destruction of our Earth. Is it not the time now to cure the disease that we ourselves have created? The answer is in our own hands, in your hands. Don't let this moment in time pass, for we may never have another, not in our lifetime. Not in anyone's lifetime.